SetDigit is an awesome professional services firm specializing in Salesforce and HubSpot implementations and advice. They kindly sponsored today's podcast, and I am very grateful for their assistance. Thanks for joining the podcast. And, my intent is to talk with different business people, whether they're, their own entrepreneur, they run their own company, or whether they're part of, big corporates, and, learn a little about the person themselves and how they got from where they used to be to where they are today. Talk about, some hurdles and things they learned along the way. And then to dabble a little bit into my realm of this whole growing the customer and what that's looked like for you and what's been worked out, what hasn't worked out, what it's like in your industry, and then more importantly, to see where your process started, whether it was years ago, weeks ago, whatever it may be, and then to figure out what you're doing now and how much it works or meets your expectations and all those kind of good things. And that's really the journey I would like the conversation to take. But we'll see when maybe we'll end up talking about sports. I really don't know.
Yeah, excellent. I hope we don't end up talking about sports because it'll be a very short conversation.
Yeah, you and me both.
Given what I know about sports, but I'm happy to go down this path with you.
Yeah.
And what is the name of this podcast series, by the way?
I really don't know yet, Eric. So maybe you can help me out with that as well. Maybe everyone else can help with. My thought about it is, candidly speaking, I don't want to pigeonhole it too much to say, breakfast biz talk or something like that, or and I don't want to talk about necessarily all things CRM and CRM world. Will probably be the focal point, so it's going to be in there, but we'll see. Maybe by the time this is published, there'll be a name stamped on it, and then we can look back and laugh at this conversation. So if you think of something, please tell me. So
I've been trying to come up with it. I have a new endeavor going, which is kind of stealthy at the moment, but I've been trying to think of a name now for about 2 months, and it is so hard. It's really so hard. I mean, because not only do you need the name, right, but then you also need a domain that is somewhat related to the name.
It's very true. And the other thing is that you could be like a startup IPO and you make a sound and you write it down with 3 I's in the middle of it, and then there's the name of your product. And it's like, it's so funny when people say they have you tried Whippy? And I'm like, what the hell's Whip? And then at the other time, like I was saying earlier, I don't want it to be corny, so it sounds like time with Michael. I mean, it's
No, yeah, of course,
yeah.
The name has to evoke all the right responses, and
there's probably 20 AI tools out there.
It also needs to have AI in it, right? So you can't have a name anymore without AI. So I've been thinking of names like with AI, but I hadn't thought of 3 I's. So like something A.
There you go. You could be like a pirate. I. So it's so funny.
Strain is the first thing that comes to mind with 3 I's. What do you think?
I don't know. And it's going to be probably summertime, and then the term AI is going to be Pat.
Well, true. But if your name is just a name and it happens to have AI in it, then
there you go.
You didn't have to. It wasn't necessarily named for AI. AI remains still a thing at some point. Then it just
and I've told you this before. I watch a lot of YouTubers related to AI stuff. I watch them every morning. Okay, every morning, one of the handful of people I follow, they're talking about something new. And every morning, I start getting this like business anxiety. I'm like, wait a minute. Oh my God. That's awesome. I got to learn that. I got to figure that and put that into my process. And then the next day comes around and there's something else. Wait, does that replace that? And then I want to pick up the phone and call these guys. My God, that's even an old thing to say. But I want to pick up the phone and go, okay, guys, when did you learn about this? Because like this thing, I watched you 4 days ago and you weren't talking about this. And now you're talking about this. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
The world is moving very fast.
Yeah. I mean, there are times I say I'm really happy I'm not 20 and have to figure out a new path. And then there's other days I'm like, oh my God, if I was 20 right now, I'd be reinventing the world. So probably the truth is like nowhere in between those two, but I don't know. So Eric, getting back to some normalcy here. Right now, I want you to talk about it, but I know you're the founder, owner of TeamMate, and I would also like to hear about your previous endeavors, but why don't you tell us about TeamMate?
Sure. Well, the TeamMate is a Teams add-on, Microsoft Teams. You've probably heard of it, that allows you to connect Microsoft Teams to external communication systems. So and we're really focused on selling through the channel to communication service providers. So our customers are service providers, maybe the service provider that provides your phone service fit to your business, and they are able to take our platform and use that to add teams to whatever their existing business is. Our bread and butter product is called the PBX connector, and it basically means you can use Teams as a kind of generic endpoint on whatever your business phone system happens to be. We thanks to the ubiquity of Teams, it's a nice product. Teams is still growing at a good clip, and as businesses adopt Teams and it becomes an integral part of their daily process, it's a rather nice thing to start using Teams as an extension of your other communications. So your phone system, SMS messages, and chat for that matter. So we just recently product where you can connect Teams chat to other chat systems like Slack, for example. And so it's kind of a interesting world to play in, trying to figure out ways to enhance the value of Teams to a service provider specifically, because but it's also almost limitless because Microsoft has done a pretty good job of making Teams indispensable to a lot of companies. Microsoft-centered IT departments love Teams, and so that's what we do.
And when you say through service providers, you're talking about the telco companies or?
That's a whole other topic, but essentially the business phone systems have been moving to the cloud for years now, for the last 10 years, 12, 15 years maybe. And so you're no longer buying your phone service from Ma Bell, or who is now
Mhm.
Verizon, of course. You're buying your service from a VoIP service provider. The biggest ones in the country are RingCentral and Vonage. I'm sure you're familiar with those names. But most businesses don't buy their phone service from RingCentral or Vonage. They buy them from their MSP. So the company that services their IT needs is generally an ISP. It's usually a local business. And for the majority of businesses in the United States, there are SMBs. So they're buying their phone service from an MSP. And this MSP typically now also sells phone service. And so those are primarily our customers, the MSPs that sell phone service.
So going back to one of the original premises of this podcast is so your customers they're at a couple different levels, and then obviously matriced across. I guess is it the country or is it the world?
It's the world. So we're in the cloud, and so particularly we're in Microsoft Azure. That's where we deliver our service
Hmm.
from. So we can deliver service from anywhere Microsoft Azure is, and therefore, excuse me, all of our customers are all over the world.
So when you go think about how do I reach, do you think about how you're going to reach more customers with your standing product? You said you had something else coming out in the Skunk Works, but your route for business development, or is it just a constantly figuring out new players around the world?
No, well, so I mean, if you use the term MSP as our target
Hmm.
customer, they're pretty easily identifiable. There's 40,000 in the United States, probably 150,000 around the world, that companies that kind of fit that MSP category. And so they're relatively easy to identify. Reaching them is a different story,
Right.
but once you can at least put a tag on them as the type of customer you're trying to reach, it narrows it down quite a bit.
And so interesting. I mean, when you say small, probably a lot of people are thinking hundreds, things like that, and then you rip out a number of 100 and some thousand, which is, I guess, I mean, and you did distinguish it. It's different between being small and also it's also important to be say that they're easily air quote distinguishable. So
Well,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, so most. sticking to the United States just as a kind of, because it's different. Sticking to the United States, I said most businesses in the United States fall into the category of a small business, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the types of companies that service the small businesses' communications needs are MSPs. And so the MSP is also generally small. Of those 40,000 MSP, the vast majority of them are, 20 people or less. Now, there are some very large MSPs, nationwide practices with,
Hmm.
thousands or even tens of thousands of employees, but they're really, they're on the tail. The vast majority of MSPs are small businesses themselves. So,
Okay.
and we sell to both kinds. We sell to, your small local MSP, and we also sell to the national, very large MSP.
So your product obviously is very scalable.
Yeah, well, that could, when you provide a service in the cloud, well, you hope that you'll
I
sign
was
up
going to say
millions
I
of
can think of
users.
some exceptions. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, our goal is to sell to 10% of the Teams users in the world, right? So that's a decent number. 30 million.
That's a very big number, I'm sure. I don't know what the number is, but it's big.
There's 300 somewhere between 320 and 350 million monthly active users of Teams. 10% of that would be
Big.
32 to 35 million users.
Yeah, that would be crazy. So with your professional journey, you were involved with a couple different efforts over the years. Have you always been focused in this telecom kind of world? How is it? How I know somewhat of your background with regards to that, but how is it? How's the genesis happened? Was it a planned thing, or is it kind of like most of us, where it's kind of like you see an opportunity to keep pivoting and moving along?
I can honestly say I've been in the telecom industry since 1996. I can honestly say I've never met anybody who has ever, dreamed of being in telecom. So it wasn't planned from in that way. But what happened was in 1996 in the United States, the telecom industry got deregulated, and it allowed many things to happen. But one of the things that happened is kind of telecom and the internet merged, and of course the internet was just getting started in 1996. And at the time, I happened to be working as a lawyer in Philadelphia. And what I dreamed about doing was not being a lawyer. So I was just looking for a way out of the 9 to 5. Yeah, I never actually planned to be a lawyer either. What I had hoped to do was to not have to join the workforce when I graduated from college, and going to law school seemed like a good way to delay it by 3 years.
Yeah, you probably should have talked to somebody at that point.
Yeah, yeah. I really should have. But anyway, so I was working as a lawyer. The internet was just starting to take off, and I was like, boy, I'd really like to get involved in the internet. And through happenstance, I did get a job as the company lawyer for a very small internet company that also happened to be doing it was just starting to dip its toe in the telecom business. And so that got me introduced to telecom at the time. And it was very interesting. This company was trying to buy capacity on the fiber optic cables that go from the United States to Asia. And back then, only the AT&T and MCI and the other very large companies were allowed to do it. So, this was a small business, maybe 50 people, just to give you an idea of the size of the company that I was working at as the company lawyer. And they're like, well, they won't let us buy into this consortium. We got to sue them. And so, here I am, a couple of years out of law school, saying, okay, we'll sue them. But anyway, long story short, we got them to allow us to buy into this undersea cable network, and that started the journey in telecom. So,
That is an interesting path. When you first started to say, you never have people that meant to be in telecom. I thought you were going to say, you don't know anybody or very few people that are doing what they studied in college. And it's like, I know very few people that in IT, it's maybe a little different now, but there's so many people that have just these degrees from all over the place doing
no,
whatever.
what I really meant to say is, like, as a kid, nobody ever says, "Oh, I'm going to be in telecom." My,
Yeah.
my kids knew what they wanted to be, from when they were very little. Veterinary, a vet being one of them. My brother, as an example, always knew he wanted to be a lawyer, and he's now a lawyer. I've never met anyone who says, "Oh, I want to be in telecom." Nowadays, of course, people kids want to be in technology
Well,
just because there's so many, there's,
yeah, and I think telecom is, the big aspects of telecom, at least, I think, are just being consumed by technology anyway. So it's,
yeah, of course it is. Although oddly, telecom is now a kind of under the technology umbrella. It is still very much different than most technology businesses because a lot of it is because there's a lot of regulation in telecom that dictates, taxation, for example, and
yeah.
how you're allowed to deliver services. It's all technology, of course, but it's a very specific
Yeah, absolutely.
business.
Absolutely. Well, it's different than when I started my own company, where I had the AT&T. What was the name of that phone? The black phone, AT&T. I can't think of it. I'll think of it the second we get done with this. But I had I was buying the big cartridges and putting them in the wall in my closet in to handle the office, and it was
Merlin, are you thinking of Merlin?
yeah, Merlin. I was going to say some wizard's name, and then I just couldn't think of any wizards. Yeah,
Oh
the
yeah,
Merlin.
I remember those Merlin systems too. No, yeah,
They had one for like voicemail and one for everything, and it was just like it's just one of those things. You do it because you have to figure it out for yourself.
yeah.
So Eric, with finding like, do you think your process for finding new customers and then obviously also keeping new customers has changed over the years? How do you think you become better at it?
That's a good question. I mean, for throughout the businesses that I've been involved in, it's really, again, if where your customers kind of congregate, you just go there, of course, right? And so
Is that a physical or a digital thing, or is it
it's
both?
both. It's both. I mean, so in the physical world, it's trade shows. So there are a lot of trade shows that specialize in the MSP sector because it's a very specific type of business that have needs that can only be met by companies that are kind of trying to meet those needs. And so we do trade shows, but also in the digital sense, knowing what your customers' pain points are and being able to put yourself in their journey to trying to solve those pain points is the other way that we get customers. Of course, search engine strategies.
Right.
When a customer comes to one of our customers and says, I really want to connect Teams to my phone system. Oftentimes, the sales engineer or the engineer will Google, how do I do this, right? And so, being
Right.
able to get your product in front of them at that point is
Well,
important.
but Erica, let me ask you there. So I was going to go to that question, but yeah, I think you just segued nicely into it. In the scenario you just said, am I wrong in understanding that that is that is an end user customer that is trying to find out the path, and sometimes, it's not a an MSP. It's a customer.
Well, no, I was in that example I just gave. It was the MSP who's going to Google how to do that. But
Okay.
because generally speaking, if you're a small or medium sized business and you have a technology problem, you have a trusted source of information, and most times it's your MSP, right? And so if you want to figure out how to upgrade your firewall or
Right.
spam protection, you'll call your MSP and you'll say, "Hey, we have a email problem. How can you help us fix it?" So the small business owner will generally call their MSP for advice. And the MSP will, if they don't have a ready solution, it will set out to try and solve that customer's problem. So we try and make ourselves available at that point when they say, okay, now I need to solve XYZ for, Mr. End customer.
Yeah, and now that you mention it, I get it because there are still many of those MSPs that have not gotten the request or have the need to connect with Teams. They still live and breathe without it, and now they finally have an opportunity, and then they go seek it. That makes sense. So I have a question. I'll relate it to my own world. For me, I'm constantly on the hunt for clients or opportunities that either have been doing their business development activity, call it customer relations management, the old way. And the old way can be lots of different ways. The old way can be an Excel spreadsheet. It could be they manage their inbox really well. They have a secret memo pad stacked up on the side of their desk, or they could be dabbling into some what I call modern CRM, and there's literally hundreds, thousands of them right now. And, the big boys out there are pretty well known, but there's just for every niche market, there's something. And what I find hard, and I think probably what a lot of, let's just say, salespeople find hard, is to find the person who has a need in general in this realm. And then two, after you find that person, how to distinguish yourself or differentiate yourself from everyone else doing the likely very similar things. And that's hard. And similar to what you said, digital forums, conferences, trade shows, the same type of thing. But what's interesting, at least from my experience, is the trade shows themselves are frequently hosted by the biggest CRM tools out there, the Microsoft Dynamics, the Salesforces, the SAPs, the HubSpots, Oracle, whomever. So it's kind of funny because you just get you get this closed environment, but those tools are so big that they have thousands of sub tools that people make and then services surrounded to them.
I think the opportunity, and of course, how you define the problem you solve, and what your key advantage is in solving a problem that somebody's willing to pay you for. How you define that, I think, is very important in terms of like how you can reach that customer. Because sure, everybody might need a CRM, right? And
Right.
at some point in their business life. But that's very general, right? And so you can't possibly reach
Right.
everybody because, so in my way of thinking, you narrow it down to a specific problem that they might have for when they have that CRM. How am I going to
Right.
import all my users? How am I going to migrate from X to Z, right? And then you can insert yourself in that particular use case and make it kind of carve out your own niche there, become known for doing that, or just,
Right.
spend your marketing dollars there because now you're inserting yourself at a specific point in that customer journey, right? And if you can find that little niche that where obviously the more common it is, the better, right? Because if you can solve a problem along the customer journey early on before they've made the decision to buy whatever it is you're selling, then boom, you're there. But like in the telephone world, the trick is always, well, when do people make their decisions about phone systems? Well, one of the times they do it is when they're moving, right? So if you can find a way to get to customers early in that moving journey. And when I say moving is like moving into a new office, right? So you're moving into a new office. So how do you do that, right? Because so if you can narrow your point of entry into, okay, let me just find customers who are moving. Well, now you can talk to moving companies or real estate agents or commercial real estate agents, right? Or
I thought you were going
other
to hang out in the U-Haul parking lot.
or that that's one way to do it too, right? But that's what I'm saying, right? Even though everybody needs a phone system, it's hard to it's hard to market to that need unless you're willing to spend big dollars. But if you can find like kind of that leverage point where you can insert yourself at a very specific place. Companies that are moving to my area code, right? I'm servicing my area code, for example, right? Now that's a doable thing, right? Because you can find a way to identify those customers and
Right.
kind of insert yourself at that.
That's very interesting. It made me think about many years ago when I had a title insurance business in Florida. It was actually in 14 states, but I was based in Florida. And I kept getting, this is before 2008 crash. In my house, I kept getting all these postcards from, hey, do you want to refi? Do you want to refi? I mean, we're all getting them every day of our life. And I started to notice that most of these things were coming from out of state. And a lot of them actually happened to be coming from, Irvine and Anaheim and California, but they were coming from out of state. And I said, well, I was title insurance agencies. And I'm like, well, if they're coming from out of state, they maybe don't have anybody to help them close stuff. So I used to every month get the free download from the state of people applying for those licenses in the state to practice mortgage. And then I was, just kind of reverse engineering
Yeah,
and going up the
there you go.
path.
Exactly. Yeah, that's
And that worked out huge for me because I didn't even cold call these people. I found a 2030 in a city, and I flew there, and I came knocking on the door, and I'm just saying, hey, I noticed you did this, and they were like, whoa. So but I hear what you're saying. Now I had to think when you were saying about moving, which I could absolutely see a good tactic, but I'm guessing the whole work from home movement is going to change that. I would think.
Well, everything's changing, right? And yes, agree. But still, even if most employees are working from home, if somebody's going to move their office, they're generally going to
Hmm.
have to, in the business phone
Or
system realm, right? They're generally going to have to solve that problem, right?
if they have an office and they're moving it, then they're not working from home. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right,
Sure. Of
right,
course.
yeah. I mean, what I mean is that even if all their employees are working from home, as long as they have a mailing address with a
Right.
phone system, right, then that still fits the model.
No, I'm assuming your tool, obviously, since it's in the cloud, the next time they move, it's really not an issue anymore. I'm assuming.
Well, I mean, we're not selling phone service, so that's not our particular
I'm saying
market.
your
Yeah,
tool set. Yeah, no, I
yeah, but our,
understand.
our,
Yeah.
our tool works no matter no,
Right. Right. Of
wherever
course. Of
where
course.
the end user happens to be.
So, getting along with the talk about CRM, do you use one? I'll give you a little teaser here. A lot of people that I advise and consult on have CRM systems, aren't necessarily happy with, they're not meeting their expectations, whether it's the tool's fault or their process fault or their own fault, but they're not happy. Just curious. I mean, do you have a CRM? What do you use? How are you happy with it?
Yeah,
How
sure.
is it? How's it implemented?
Yeah, I mean, I've always used the CRM in any business that I've had the ability to make a decision about that. Currently, we're using HubSpot. I'm a big
Mm-hmm.
believer, and so uh,
Do
I
you do you think you interact with it well? I mean, like, does it do what you wish it to do?
um,
And I'm not picking on HubSpot.
I'd say I'm 80% satisfied, and not because it does with any tool, especially a tool like HubSpot that becomes more valuable the more you use it for, the more you connect it to, the more
Hmm.
it's interconnected with outside systems. It's mostly about getting it to talk to about automating tasks. And so when you start using when we started using HubSpot, you start with the biggest tasks to automate first. Like a new lead comes in, right? We want to put them in a drip campaign. We want to, categorize them, do as many things as you can automatically, and then as you solve those bigger problems, then you're down to smaller problems. Okay, we haven't heard from them in 6 months. Now we're going to do something else. Um, as you move from the top of the funnel to the bottom. So I think HubSpot is great as a general tool. And are we using it to its fullest extent? No way. But it's been
Yeah.
good so far.
HubSpot has over the past, I'm just going to pick the number out of my head, 8 to 10 years, changed so much in their capability. It is unbelievably impressive. And I don't know if you've looked into it since, when we started this conversation, we were talking about AI this and AI that, but HubSpot has this thing called Breeze, which you have access to. It's just like every other AI slope. Once you start going down that slope, your head starts exploding with all these new ways. But we can, with buyer intent and to the things you're talking about, maintaining data cleanliness and auto filling information. It's pretty cool. I mean, all the good systems can do it, but since you mentioned HubSpot, and they're releasing, actually going to a conference next week in Manhattan hosted by HubSpot. And there's, I think, only like 10 other service providers going. I happen to be the lucky one from SetDigit that they're releasing a bunch of new things behind the curtain. So I'm curious to see how that all turns out. Here's a question for you. I've written 2 books on CRMs, and they're both affectionately called How to F Up CRM, and then an introductory book to AI and CRM. And a large theme I have is about, learning from your mistakes. And, if you ever talk to someone and said they were always right, or if you're interviewing someone and they say, oh, I never had a mistake, I never had a person I didn't want to work with, run away. So here's the question. Can you think of that obviously you can anonymize it, but can you think of a big mistake that you learned from that's changed your ways for the better?
Are you talking about with respect to CRM?
With respect to business, and if you can tie it into customer, I don't need CRM, but just if you can tie into something about, wow, I'm never going to do that again.
Geez, where do I start?
That's the real answer right there.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you one of mine. Is, and you kind of were touching on it before, is trying to be everything to a client. And in this case, it was an internal client. I was heading up operations, and I knew the capabilities, of Salesforce. And we were just scratching the surface on what it could do. And I was ending up being the prophet of this tool. And you start to look a little insane if it's like, I can fix everything with this tool. And I wasn't so far down the path to be crazy man, but I do remember going to leaders and saying, they'd say, well, how can you help me? Well, I used to say, imagine you had a newspaper on your desk every morning when you walked into your office, and that newspaper was customized for yourself. So each panel would say whatever you wanted, like your clients in the news, your staff, where they are in their.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said, and I literally had a piece of 11 by 17 paper and a Sharpie, just said, just draw it. And I knew I could do everything I was saying. So I knew I wasn't insane, but to them, they couldn't get past go. In
Well, I
hindsight,
mean, it's hard to, if anything's possible, it's hard to know where to start, right? Like
no, and that's what I learned. I learned that it was much better to bring the paper to them that I thought would meet 80% of their needs, and then have them like cross off a box and say, can you do X or Y or Z? But that took me longer than I would care to admit to learn that lesson.
Mm, yeah.
The reality is that certainly my best teacher has been, except for a few mentors in my life, it's been myself stumbling, and then checking my ego at the door and being humble enough to say, wow, that was wrong, and then moving on. So, and I sprung a weird question on you, so I apologize for that. But
That's all right.
everything
This
everything
this
everything is a learning process, and
this wasn't in the
um
this wasn't in the pre-show packet.
no. Did I send you a pre-show packet? No. So anyway, I know we're up on time, but thank you so much for your time. Wish you all the best, and keep going with whatever you're doing, and I hope your skunk works project works well for you too.
Yeah, well, looking forward to telling you more about it at the
All
appropriate
right.
time.
Take care.
Yeah,
Thank you, sir.
thank you too.
I once again would like to thank SetDigit for making this podcast possible. We all hope you enjoyed the conversation.